Great, good afternoon everyone. Are you able to hear me in the back row? Fine? Yeah? So my name is Robbie Jones. I'm one of the product managers for the Oracle Digital Assistant, or what we call ODA. And today we're going to be looking at how the Digital Assistant has a bunch of built-in machine learning and artificial intelligence features that'll make your life a lot easier. So hopefully everyone's already seen this slide today. Let me turn this monitor off. One of the reasons, and you probably don't, or it may not have been mentioned yet, but ODA is listed first on this slide because we were actually the first AI service. So we came out about 6 years ago. And in the last 6 years, we've been adding things like speech, language, vision, anomaly detection, some of the other neat things that we've seen in this room here today. My favorite bullet item is this one right here. No data scientists needed. So as long as you can use a web browser and a mouse, you can do all sorts of machine learning training, and we'll see examples of that coming up. If you are a data scientist, good news. There's still the Jupyter notebooks and the tools and features that you like inside of the Oracle AI services. So what is a digital assistant? What you see here, this is actually just from the lower right corner of a web page, but basically think of it as a chatbot. In this case, you can interact with human resource type information. This could be supply chain. There's a whole list. We'll actually see a number of these different use cases. But note in this conversation, the topic changes. So at first we talk about maybe doing some expenses, and we talk about doing some HR stuff. Then maybe we might want to go back and get the weather. Now the digital assistant is a router to traffic controller to these different type of chatbots. And we'll see examples of this coming up shortly. The definition on the left, this is a formal, but really what we're trying to say is that the digital assistant offers a conversational UI. So being able to talk to an application, being able to use voice, everyday language, that's one of the key benefits here. On this screen, on the left-hand side, any app, this could be an Oracle or it could be a third-party application. It can be in the cloud, it can be in the Oracle cloud, or it can be in another cloud. The app can be on-premise, doesn't matter. As long as it has some sort of REST interface or some sort of interface that's exposed, we want to be able to access it by devices on the far right-hand side. So your Alexa, your Google Home, your phone, maybe it's text messaging, maybe it's Slack, Microsoft Teams, Facebook Messenger. These are what we call channels in our parlance. And what we have in the middle are what we call skills. When you see the word skill, think of that as a chatbot. So these honeycombs, we've got skills out of the box, the different groups at Oracle have built. So for example, we have out of the box skills or chatbots for supply chain management, for field services, for customer service, for human capital management. And then notice the honeycomb at the very bottom, legacy. So being able to build your own. I think all this means is that when we go do the live demo, that's actually going to work. So we've vetted out our technical issues. So again, the honeycomb, each of those is a chatbot or a skill. The digital assistant is a traffic controller that can handle, when we saw that earlier conversation that kept segueing and changing topics and changing conversations, the digital assistant goes, oh, I need to now call up human capital management, the next one. So in absence, next one might be expenses. So the digital assistant's what's routing traffic. So conversational experiences, these are important for a number of reasons. One, you can just use plain ordinary language. So instead of having to remember what EBS or what PeopleSoft or what Workday app or form or web page and what menu item, where do I go to do that? You just say to Alexa, hey, Alexa, initiate a paid time off request. There's no app to download. There's no special menu, or I should say that there's no special mobile phone that we need for it. They run 24/7, so this is important for people with contact centers or help desks, and they want to be able to staff this all day long. You can offload a lot of those requests by the digital assistant. And they're immediately responsive. We'll see examples of this coming up. So doing conversational user interfaces is a little complex, and we've abstracted some of this complexity for you. But just to give you an example, if you look at these two sentences, at first glance they kind of look similar, but once we start peeling back the onion, we see that we need to understand, okay, what is the intent? What is the user trying to do? They're trying to get from Rome to Milan, but really the question might be logistics. How does that actually work? How could I actually do that? Or it might be a purchasing question. How do I actually purchase the ticket? So being able to parse those sentences and get what the action is, and then try to figure out what the data is that needed for those actions. So for that, we've built a bunch of features inside of ODA, inside the digital assistant. So for example, if you're familiar with the NVIDIA GPUs that are optimized for machine learning, those are inside. So ODA is running inside of the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure on these hybrid GPU and CPUs. We've done a bunch of pre-training already. So when you first load up ODA, you actually don't need to go and train it against a large corpus of data. We've already done that for you. We've blended a number of language models and added on top of that enterprise in business terms. So a great example is the word or the acronym EBITDA. That stands for Earnings Before Interest, Tax, and Appreciation. So if you were to ask Google or some of these other models, hey, what's the EBITDA for Ford? It actually does a named lookup. If you're in the earlier session where they talked about name entity recognition, so it tries to figure out who at Ford is named EBITDA. Because we've blended in these business terms, ODA knows right away that's earned business interest and taxation, and it provides you the results for that. Earlier today in the same room, some of my colleagues showed language in speech services. I recognize some of you from the earlier sessions there, but that is also incorporated into ODA. And we can actually see an example when we use ODA later on. We'll actually be able just to use the microphone on the laptop and interact with it. In the lab that we did downstairs, there was being able to detect sentiment and what the language was. That's also integrated here. Moving to the right-hand side, we'll see an example of dialogue flows, but how do you want a flow of a conversation to take place? And having a visual tool to lay that out. There's a skill store. So as I mentioned before, there's a number of Oracle products that have built skills using this tool. So you can just go into the ODA skill store and say, oh, I'd like to use the PeopleSoft skills and pull those down. And then insights. When you see this word, this really means analytics. So how many people you're interested in, what time of day are they using the chat, what is the most frequently used term that they're searching on. Something that's really useful there also is where are people getting maybe frustrated, or you can see that they're just ending the conversation, so you can go in and rework the flow of the conversation. So this is what I was talking about, this visually diagramming the flow of a conversation. So we call this VFD, the Visual Flow Designer. And it's similar to Visio, so just being able to drag and drop. So in this first example, maybe this is a banking example, and the customer says, what's my balance? And now you, as an ODA developer, you want to do some conditional logic. So maybe you want to check, are they authenticated? If they're not authenticated yet, maybe send a one-time password. If they only have one account, maybe you want to provide the balance. If they have more accounts, maybe ask for which account and be able to map that out. That's what's inside of this Visual Flow Designer. If you used, I mentioned this came out 6 years ago, the product. If you used it up until, 18 months ago, there was yet another markup language where you had to code some conditional logic. That's no longer required. So now we can do this all through this drag and drop editor. Another neat thing is what we're calling knowledge documents. So this is the ability to basically pass ODA or have ODA ingest a PDF, a Word document, HTML, or web pages. In this case, it's a policy document for human resources. It's the 18-page legalese of, hey, this is what you can do and can't do. And then ODA parses that and then generates answers and questions. So then you can just ask ODA, how do I sign up for my 401k? And it comes back with an answer. The next feature, this is kind of, well, this is my favorite new feature. And I'm going to show this to you live as soon as this animation plays here. But it's called SQL Dialogues. I think maybe SQL Lists Dialogues would be a good name too, because basically what it allows you to do is query a database without knowing SQL. So if we think about what we just saw there, who are all the car makers, how many models do they make, and what are the names of them? Instead of having to figure out, okay, is that an inner join or an outer join? What am I grouping on? What's the table? What's the schema? What are my credentials to it? Basically, what ODA does is a transformation and a translation, if you will, of the natural everyday language into SQL. And then it issues that SQL statement, and it gives you the results. So the problem we're trying to solve is for those users or maybe it's a business user who doesn't know the underlying schema, probably doesn't know SQL, may not have the time to go find a DBA to go run a report. We just want to give them the capability to do these kind of ad hoc queries on the fly. So here's an interesting example. So how much do employees make in the Big Apple? So I underlined the Big Apple, getting back to what I said earlier, that we've blended and trained a number of these language models. Nowhere in your database, probably, or I should say if we go back, if we think about the previous schema, there was a city. There was no value that said the Big Apple. But because of the machine learning that we've already pre-trained, ODA knows Big Apple equals New York. So when you enter in that query, you'll get something like select average. You can see the SQL there. And basically, ODA comes back with the answer. So now I'm going to show this to you live. I was going to say, I recognize a lot of you from our previous lab. It would have been great if I could have gone with this segment first. So you would have seen the ODA console. But what we have here is I've logged in. And I'm going to make the screen a little larger so I can read it. Under additional services, notice there's a data tab, which is relatively new. We've got a bunch of data services already pre-configured, and one is just the standard Apex human resources example. It's hosted in OCI, so there's a cloud wallet. There's a username. If you wanted to use a different one, it's just as simple as entering the name that you've already created in OCI and the cloud wallet and the credentials. So again, under additional services, you have this data tab and the ability to configure a data service. Now we're going to switch to development, and we're going to switch to skills. And I'm going to create a new skill. I'm going to randomly give it some name. Now the first thing I really want to stress today is that ability to do ad hoc queries on the fly. So in the past, when you were creating a chatbot, doesn't matter whose tool you were using, but the first thing you had to do was think about, remember that previous slide that we saw, intents. What is the user going to do? What do we think he or she is going to do? And you can't think of everything that they may try. So usually you would come in here and you would define your intents first. But the reason the SQL lists dialogues is so interesting is that we don't have to worry about this anymore. We're not going to define any intents. We're just going to let people query on the fly. So we're going to skip this screen, and we're going to go to the entities. You might want to think of these as the nouns that the intent, that the action is going to take place on. So here, anything you see in capital letters, this is offered to you out of the box. So we've got address, date, times, etc. Notice there's import from data service. And notice we have that apex that we saw earlier. This is parsing the schema on the back end. It looks at the tables. It goes, and for this particular example, I'm interested in the employees and departments. Make that smaller. And I'll say import. So what we've just done is we've told ODA, hey, there's this table, there are these two tables in the schema. Everybody knows how to connect to it through the API services, the additional settings. Notice there's a train button here now because we've now added employees and cities, train the model. Now that's going to take a couple of minutes. We're going to use this machine learning based training. And this, when we say Big Apple, it'll know, okay, that's going to be New York. And I'm not going to wait a couple minutes. I'm just going to go to another skill where I've already trained it before, I should say before this section. And we'll search for it. Apex. I can't read this screen at all. Give me one moment. Apex. It's a little slow. There we go. Now notice over here there's a preview tab. Try this. How many employees do I have in the Big Apple? This is a tester that's just built into ODA. There's a couple different things. Notice the channel. If we wanted to preview what this would look like through maybe a Slack interface or Microsoft Teams, we can do that as well. This wouldn't be a live demo if something wasn't slower than normal. Great. So I went back. And again, remember, notice I said the Big Apple, and it was able to figure out that's New York, and it tells me that there's 3 employees in there. Remember, intentless. We don't have to worry about intents anymore. So this is kind of trying to figure out, had we not used SQL, dialogues for this. And had we would created a different number of intents. Basically, this is a probability model. And it would have come back and said, hey, they're probably trying to do some sort of HR stuff, and we think it's 90% that, and it's 10% having to do with expenses. But the neat thing is we don't have to worry about intents anymore. So we're going to use SQL dialogues. And this is what it's doing. It's transforming / translating plain, everyday spoken English into, at the end, the SQL that needs to happen behind the scenes for that to work. Great. So we just saw that. We just did that live. That was through the web channel. I'm just going to point out again this drop down. So if you wanted to test what does that same thing look like, but through Facebook Messenger as an example, or through the iOS or Slack, etc., that's all available to you there. We can have that same conversation through Slack. We actually use this internally when we submit our expenses. So we use Slack, we use the upload, so using Oracle AI Vision, we upload a receipt, it parses it, and it says, oh, hey, it looks like you were at Dev Week and you spent $4 on gas. Would you like me to submit that? Microsoft Teams is another common interface for ODA. Now I'm actually going to talk really, really quickly, or I should say I'm going to go through these slides more quickly, and you'll see why in a minute. But we can customize the way the pagination results come back and are laid out in SQL dialogues. And if you wanted to do like additional drill downs or questions and add buttons, all that is available to you. There are even event handlers in here. And the reason I went through that so quickly is because we have a call of action for you. And that's for you to actually go try this yourself. So this is just our standard docs.oracle.com. And there's the bit.ly for it, ODA doc. And in the bottom right corner, you'll actually have a chat with me. And it brings up our ODA called Artie. And I typed in, how do I use SQL dialogues? And it gave me a little blurb on it. And then it actually gave me a link to the feature documentation as well as a presentation. And the 4 previous slides that we just saw, I just actually stole from that feature documentation. So if you're using this and you don't like the way that the results are laid out, or you want a table in a different type of format, that's all available through these docs. Other things that are on this page that are of use, or I should say, everything on this page is of use, but some of the ones that I use a lot or point my customers and partners to, the tutorials. Underneath the tutorials, down below there's also best practices. And then one of the neatest things is just instead of searching, instead of using the search bar up there, just use Artie. Notice the microphone here. Just type in or I should say just speak in your questions and use that conversational UI. That demo that I just showed you, if you wanted to run that yourself, you can just go to YouTube, search for Quick Start on SQL Dialog, SQL Dialog, and it'll walk you through that same demo. This is my last slide. So the ability to do this intentless, so not having to think out and map and try to catch every possible intent, just having people ad hoc on the fly query your application. You saw that whole demo I did in about maybe 2 minutes. Not 2 hours, not 2 days. In the past, building some of these things took a long time. Now this is greatly reducing the amount of time. Lastly, just being able to converse, just using natural everyday language. That's one of the neatest ways that we're leveraging AI and the services inside of Oracle Cloud Infrastructure that are for artificial intelligence and machine learning. This is just a very easy way to bring in those different tools. And with that, I'm going to stop 2 minutes over time and open up to questions.